So this is just a little bit of a carry-on video from my previous video I've just put out. Now, because it's dry, finally, I can actually start clearing some of the areas. Now, this area in this greenhouse, we were going to actually remove and take down. It's very small, it's not exactly the greatest of heights, and it's just generally not the greatest greenhouses, but we're going to keep it for this year. While we're moving things around and getting things sorted, this greenhouse will filled with bits of wood, netting, pots, whatever we had, because we were going to take down the shed, came into the greenhouse to stay dry. Now, unfortunately, those winds and things ripped off the actual one of the panels on the top where we've got the opening window, and there was a lot of water that actually got in here. Another issue that I had was I actually kept all my sunflower heads from last year's season to regrow for this year. Now, I'd collected loads of variety, and I'd also been given some sunflower heads from other people with some beautiful different types to grow here on our allotment. Now, when I was moving some of the stuff, I actually broke one of the glass panels on the lower part. Now, this was my downside to not fixing it straight away. We've had issues with rats. Now, we've always had rats on this allotment way before we even thought about having chickens. It's one of those things. There's a lot of places on this allotment, on the whole of the site, where it's very wild. There's plenty of places for them to live. Where we put the compost bins, we had rat tunnels left, right and centre. And unfortunately, we do have some locals who do actually seem to put food out for the rats. So I think wherever you are, you're always close to having rats. Now, we didn't notice any major issues with rats until towards the end of our lives of our chickens, when we started noticing more and more rats around. But what we did start noticing, that there was a lot more rubbish being dumped outside of the site in the local area. Lots more scraps of food, lots more everything. Before that, we didn't have any major issues in our chicken coop with rats. But unfortunately, they came and they did stay. Now, there's a whole load of things for deterring rats and getting rid of rats and everything else. Now, we took down our old chicken coop, which moved the rats on. But unfortunately, as I've come into the greenhouse, I think they've moved into here. Now, as we've opened the greenhouse and I've started clearing up, there was soil all over the floor, and there was a freshly dug hole as well in the beds. So I'm pretty sure I've got rats here. I've also think we've probably got mice as well, which really I don't really mind too much, but I just don't want to boost the local population. And unfortunately, all of those sunflower seeds and the heads have been decimated in here because of the mice. Now, you might remember earlier in last year, we actually had mice do the same thing to my sunflower seeds at that time of year as well. I should have learned, but I completely forgot that I had actually broken the window to the greenhouse, and it gave them really, really easy access. But another thing I've noticed this year, and I know that this is rats, is there is actually large holes tunnelling underneath the greenhouse to come in through the actual beds. Apart from rat poison and that kind of means, or getting myself a ratter, there is not much more apart from trying to keep the site free of things they like to eat. Now, I've removed all the sunflower heads in here now. I think they've had their free food enough now. And we have actually got rat boxes around. Now, I don't like to do things like that, but at the same time, I don't want to increase the local rat population for other people to have issues with as well. So keeping your site clean and free is a good way of reducing this rat population. Now, we wanted to move our chicken coop anyway because the previous tenant, because we turned it a shed into the chicken coop, had actually raised it on pallets. Now, these pallets created a fantastic area for rats to actually live in and to not have to worry and be completely sheltered. Now, the shed's on the same kind of thing, so eventually that will be dealt with as well. But at the moment, we're just dealing with it bit by bit as much as what we can do. So let's have a look in our greenhouse. So as I've walked in, you can actually see the mud on the path where they've dug through. and I can actually see tunnels going through the bed, which is not good. And you can see where my sunflower seed heads were that were in a box. So something's obviously had a good feast. Now I'm pretty sure that this is probably a mouse. And obviously that's exactly where I broke the last pane of glass. Now, because I wasn't going to keep this particular greenhouse, I was actually going to dismantle it and get rid of everything. I did grow okay in this particular area last year, but it could have been so much better. Now, one of the reasons why it's not the greatest is this soil. Now, I did add an awful lot of mulch on it last year, a lot of manure, other bits and pieces to really feed the soil. It's a very, very sandy soil here. Now, the previous person who we'd had this off actually had these beds filled with topsoil. And it certainly wasn't a good quality by the time we'd actually had it. So I thought adding all that extra manure and things would really, really benefit this particular greenhouse beds. But what I think I'm going to do is actually take out a lot of this soil and actually add in our own compost, since we are actually going to grow in it this year. Now, we've got 2 greenhouses on the go, so we'll have this one for actually growing any pots or plants or anything like that in. And then I'm building a new greenhouse where it will be just for seedlings and potting on and things like that. So we've got them separate, so I'm not tripping over myself in different areas. But these beds really do need a lot of work. And I think that's what I'm going to actually crack on and try and get done today. But what I am worried, if there's rats in here, they're going to come out. And the last thing I want to have is to be chased by any rats. Now, there's lots of natural remedies out there for rats, but I find most of them actually don't work. Now, I find that certain things like chili pepper, cayenne, things like that, do or can deter either foxes or rats. Mammals are much more sensitive to that kind of heat than, say, any birds or chickens, things like that. So that's something safe that I could actually use. But what I am concerned with is if they have settled in home here, I'm going to have a hard time to move them on. Now, normally people have rat issues in compost bins. We've not had that issue. We've not found any issues like that at all. And we don't put any meat products or dairy products in our compost bins. But I think it's going to be an ongoing battle to keep rats away. Now, obviously this site will be completely cleared within the next week. The weather's lifting and I'm able to get down here each day and start clearing any bits of clutter and things that we don't actually need anymore, which will reduce any areas for rats. But to be honest, it's not those areas we've got problems with rats with. It's actually the actual buildings and things like that. Now, the one thing I am grateful for is our local fox. Now, you've probably seen previous videos. The local fox really does cause us a lot of issues. But in this regard, when it comes to rat control, local foxes are really, really good. And in fact, our local fox, once it comes in and digs one of our beds, which, yeah, it does do that, leaves big holes, but it also leaves us nice giant rats. Now, the biggest rat that we did have was literally like that. It was actually bigger than my foot. I'm a size 7. It was humongous. Bit the tail off, bit a lot of their face off, and literally half dug it into one of our beds. So that was really nice to come down to have to deal with. But I'm hoping, if we can't deter the fox from coming onto our site, I'm hoping it's actually going to go after the rats. Now, that's one of the things I don't want to use rat poison for. Now, I have got a control box because I don't want to cause issues for my neighbours. It's the last thing I want to have to deal with is dealing with complaints from households locally, maybe trying to blame me for rat infestation when the rats were a lot worse before we came onto the site. In fact, when we first came on, you could see loads of rats running across the grassy areas that we had at the time. They would literally, in swarms, run around and do all sorts. Now, since being on the site, it's dramatically reduced. So that's good. But it's something that we have to work on. Now, I don't mind rats, as in like a pet rat or things like that, but wild rats I'm not that keen on. Since when I was a kid, I actually got backed into a corner and the rat was biting anything that went near it. And I literally couldn't escape because it would try and jump on my leg and it was trying to bite my leg as I was trying to escape. So it really did put me off rats. But I think what I'm going to do today, I'm going to try and get this greenhouse topped up with a little bit of compost if I can find some at the compost bin, because I've really gone hard on the compost bins this year. Get this bed sorted and I'll show you how it looks at the end. Now, what I had left, I've managed to do one side, which is pretty pathetic really, but it's a start. And all I've got to do is the rest of this. Now, like I said, it'd be nice to have got it all topped up completely today. And we have got another bay of compost. But at the moment I've got stuff in front of it and we're trying to let it mature just a little bit longer because it was much later made compared to this one. Now, whereas it could probably still be used, wouldn't be an issue. I think I can wait a month or so before I top up the rest of these beds. Now, I'm more than aware that I'm going to have an awful lot of sunflower seeds germinating in here. In fact, it might be a really good way of getting sunflowers to grow for me to put out onto the allotment itself, but we'll have to wait and see. I was not going to stand there and pick up all those sunflower seeds to actually stop them from growing and germinating for next year. We're going to be putting a lot of sunflower seeds on anyway, so any of the ones that we get from here with no hassle or no sowing from me, so be it. They'll just be transferred into the new area once they're big enough. Now, there's probably going to be some random chili seeds in here as well. So we may get a few sweet peppers or cayenne peppers in here too, but we shall see. As to what I'm actually going to grow in here this year, well, that will be on my next video. I'm going to be discussing what I'm actually hoping to grow this year. Now, we're not making major changes, but there is certain things that we're actually going to try that are new for us. Certain chili varieties and certain squash varieties and some other new things that we're hoping to grow, including ginger, lemongrass and a load of different herbs that we haven't really grown before. I want to grow things that we can actually use within our own home to use for cooking and preserving, things like that. So I want to try and experiment a little bit more next year. Hopefully this area will be good enough to grow something new. But at least I can try and get the soil a little bit better. But I think it's going to take a few years to get this soil in a really good condition without me having to take out a ton of the actual soil that's already there. I think I can actually add in lots of manure if I can get it, or homemade compost to really benefit these beds in here. And by the looks of it, this greenhouse is going to be staying for a little bit longer yet, maybe another year or two. But I am hoping in the future to get a much bigger greenhouse, so I don't feel so enclosed in these small ones. So if you've got any ideas, guys, about how to deal with any rats on your plot, I know a lot of you have issues with rats. It's not a subject most people like to talk about because they think that there's never any rats near their property or anything else. Well, I'd hate to say it, but you do have rats around. Whether they cause you any issues or not is a completely different story. But how do you guys deal with your rats? Or any kind of rodent issues? Now, I know you all have issues with mice at some time. I see it all the time online with people losing their seeds and things like that. Now, I don't mind 1 or 2 mice, but again, I don't want a mass. But just let me know in the comments, guys, how you deal with that kind of thing. Like I said, it wasn't the chickens that brought the rats in the first place. There was a mass amount of rats on this site before that even happened, and there's no food that gets left on the floor or in the tubs overnight. Well, it didn't when the chickens were here, and when we do get new chickens, it will all be in a way that the rats can't get to any of the food, which I'll have to have a look at and have a think about how we're going to do that. But again, thank you for watching, guys, and it's one step closer to getting my allotment ready for spring is by getting the greenhouse sorted. and hopefully I'll benefit from some really good growing in here this year.